Everyone is welcome here. You are welcome here regardless of your age, your race, your income, your religion, or the gender with which you identify. You are welcome here regardless of who you love, who you vote for, the regrets that burden you, or the mistakes you have made. In the faith community, we support each other in the sacred task of becoming, celebrate the transcending mystery of life, and rely on the transforming power of love. Here, we revere the words of the great teachers, such as Jesus, the Buddha, and Confucius. It is, however, the task of every UU to be their own Buddha, their own Jesus, their own Confucius. It is our work as a community to walk with each other along the spiritual pathways that lead towards happiness, compassion, and life fully lived. And while we are a safe harbor where there is solace and healing, we are also a launching pad from which we are propelled into the tumult of life to live courageously, justly, and lovingly. In this sacred place, we create the structures that lift up the downtrodden, set the captives free, and heal the brokenhearted. Here, we have learned that to be fully human is to be fully divine, and that with a little help from our friends, we can each tell our own unique story.
Today is Biodiversity Sunday, which has been celebrated in UU churches, but I don't think it's ever been celebrated here. It's on this day because the third Friday in May is Endangered Species Day. And so Biodiversity Sunday has come off of that. I'd like to say the words some of you may have read in the Buff Announce. Biodiversity is every living being on this planet, from the smallest moss to the tallest tree, from a tiny moth to the largest whale. And as humans, it is up to us to protect it.
We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Okay, so today I have a modest proposal. Back in 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act gave 160 acres of public land to anyone who was willing to farm it. To retain ownership of the land, a farmer had to, in the first 5 years, dig a well, put at least 80 acres into cultivation, build some kind of permanent domicile, and plant some trees around the farmstead. Black Americans were not included in this land giveaway. In 1931, my grandfather bought 480 acres, a combination of 3 homesteads, near Amenia, North Dakota. He paid $30 an acre. In the 18th and early 20th century, the main means of powering agricultural equipment was the horse or oxen. I was born in 1950 and still remember my dad harnessing up our 2 draft horses for occasional choring around the farmstead, even though by that time we had several tractors for field work. If one had horses and oxen, one needed a pasture. Pasture land required fencing. As a kid, I spent a good deal of my summers repairing fallen fence and removing and replacing rotted fence posts. Every farm had a pasture with fence and a fence row. The fence row was the margin of land on which the fence sit. It was often 6 or 8 feet in width, or even wider, and ran the whole length of the pasture perimeter. This area provided cover for ground nesting birds like pheasants, partridge, killdeer, and meadowlarks. It was also a place where Columbian ground squirrel, groundhogs, jackrabbits, field mice, and cottontail rabbits lived in abundance. We often saw foxes on the hunt along the fence row of our pasture. Hawks patrolled the fence row during the day, and at twilight, you could be surprised by the sudden rush of an owl flying on silent wings only 4 or 5 feet above the ground, using its stereoscopic hearing to pounce and dine on some hapless field mouse. Vegetation along the fence row was 3 foot high prairie grass dotted with dogbane, chicory, milkweed, and wild roses. The fence row never saw mower, sickle, or scythe. A small boy could sit in the long grass along the fence row and be almost invisible, which I did a lot. One cool day in May, I was doing just that. As I was sitting quiet and still in the afternoon sun, I witnessed a life and death drama that is over 60 years later still annealed to my memory. I was sitting in my usual spot. I was aware that a mother killdeer and her 4 chicks had a nest only about 10 feet from my position. I watched the little chicks, and they looked like cotton balls mounted on toothpicks, followed their mother around out onto the grazed down pasture land. Their little legs moved in such a blur that it was almost as if they were floating on a cushion of air. For no reason I could discern, the mother killdeer urgently led her chicks back to the cover of their nest in the long grass. In the nest, she gathered the little ones under her wings and sat very still. This is when I saw the fox. I knew the fox. She had a den in the railroad right away about a quarter mile away. She had 2 kits that she was raising and had to feed. When the fox drew to within 20 feet of the killer nest, the mother killdeer exploded into the air and, like a kamikaze dive bomber, flew at top speed right into the fox's face. The fox was set back on its heels. The mother killdeer then, for 10 or 15 minutes, did her broken wing act, drawing the fox further and further away from her babies. Eventually, the fox tired of the game and left to find more compliant prey. Sometimes life requires courage. I pray that should I require that kind of courage, that I will find within myself the spirit of that mother killdeer. So here is my proposal. The fence rows and the shelter belts have mostly disappeared in North Dakota. Farming is done by giant tractors and combines that run on diesel fuel. The pastures are gone, and along with them, the fence rows with all their diversity of life. Why not provide for the wild flora and fauna? Why not encourage farmers through subsidies, and we already pay farmers a lot of subsidies, to leave a 10-acre patch of land on each section of 640 acres just for wildlife? Imagine what it could mean to the human spirit. Imagine what it could mean to the spirit of life. Our lives are enriched, and the ecosystems of our planet are stronger and more vibrant when the hawk is on the hunt, when the wild rose is giving bloom, when a herd of pronghorn antelope roll like a wave across the prairie. Everything really is connected. When we plow into the prairie grass, clear cut the forest, and drive our big CO2 spewing pickup trucks to the grocery store to pick up a carton of milk, we are destroying ourselves. And that is the real message that I want to get through today. And I know that I'm not going to do it quite as well as Linda, but we are all connected. When we damage the environment, when we mow a ditch, that's one of the big things farmers do now. They have big mowers. They can mow their ditches. Back in my day, you didn't mow the ditch because you didn't have the right kind of equipment, and the ditches were a home for a lot of animals. And beautiful flowers. When you damage, pollute a river, when you leave a garbage at a campfire site, you are damaging, not only damage nature, but you're damaging yourself. But the converse is also true. It is also true that when you damage yourself, when you involve yourself in behavior that's harmful to you, or harmful to society, you do damage to nature. And it's my particular opinion, and this is my opinion, not necessarily anybody else's, is that nature doesn't end at the front door of our house or at the front door of the school. That we are not an extension of nature, but we are nature itself. We are nature happening. There are no boundaries between us and nature, but we are the part of nature that is self-aware, and we are the part of nature that needs to be intentional about how we manage nature on the other side of that divide, of the unconscious part of nature. Now, one of my guys that I really like a lot is also a founder of the Unitarian Universalist Church, our association, and his name is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Emerson had the idea, and this is an idea I really like, and once again, this is just my way I prefer of imagining the universe. Ralph Waldo Emerson had the idea of the oversoul, an oversoul, that really the universe had just one soul, and that you and I and the groundhog digging out back and the wild turkeys that come to the door before church services on Sunday mornings. I've seen them the last couple mornings, last couple Sundays, are just manifestations of that one soul. So we really are, if that is true, if that way of imagining has any truth to it, we are really all connected. We are all really one. And what we do to one, we do to all. And now I'll turn it over to Linda. I've been looking forward to Linda's talk for a couple weeks now.
I'd like to start my talk by asking, what are the threats to biodiversity? Reverend Jim has already mentioned at least one: habitat loss. And so I'd like to ask you if you can think of any others.
Humans.
Well, be more specific, please.
Cutting your trees in the Amazon, all kinds of stuff.
Okay, deforestation, that's more habitat loss. Yeah. Forever chemicals, and also, well, other chemicals that are put into the environment. Pesticides and herbicides. I read one article that said they ought to actually be called biocides. Are there any others? Plastic. Yeah, that's a big problem. Plastic never goes away. It just breaks into smaller pieces. And somehow now there are actually animals that are living on plastic. I don't know how well they survive, but they're living there. Roger?
Human overpopulation.
Well, that's part of it. We do affect plants and animals by pushing them out of where they lived. Lori?
Global warming.
Yeah, climate change is actually the greatest threat to biodiversity. Okay. There are others that have been mentioned. There's pollution, not just to water and air, but you can also think of light pollution that affects species that need the darkness, birds that are migrating, and also species like moths and fireflies. They can get very confused by light and noise, not just the noise we make on land that can scare animals away, but in the ocean. Whales are strongly affected by noises that is made in preparation for oil drilling. There are blasts made underwater, and the whales can't communicate with each other. And another one is invasive species, which is something we have caused by bringing in plants, or usually insects, or even fungus diseases from places where the plants and animals that live there had evolved with them, and then we bring them to places where they don't belong and they take over. And the last one I'm going to mention in this part is water. And that's both a lack of water as to drought and too much water. Sea level rise, which threatens coastal marshes, and just plain flooding. Part of that's caused by a lack of wetlands to absorb the water. And that last one is something I'm going to talk about with a story from my own life. I'm a plant person, as you might know. Many years ago in high school was when I started to learn about plants. I was a volunteer in the DuPage County Forest Preserves. And in the summer before my senior year, all of us, there was a group of about a dozen of us, and most of them were actually adults, not teenagers. We were learning about different plant communities in the area. So we went everywhere that summer, prairies and woodlands and marshes. And one place we went to was like nothing we had ever seen before. It was called the alkaline fen. A fen is a wetland that needs water to survive, but not that much water, but the water comes up from underground that helps support the plants. But the pH of the water, since it usually goes through limestone, is very high. So not that many plants can grow there. And they're very specialized and thus very rare. So the group of us were taken to this fen by naturalists and taught about it. And the fen was dominated by a plant called Great Angelica, which stood over 6 feet tall. And that's a plant that's actually in the parsley family. If you can imagine parsley or Queen Anne's lace or dill that is over 6 feet tall. That gave the whole place a kind of otherworldly appearance. I became fascinated with fens, and I always wanted to see that one again. In the succeeding years, I visited other fens, and there were so many, they were all different. But that was the first one I ever saw, so it was special. 12 years after that summer, I was hired by the Forest Preserve as the summer assistant to the botanist. And he had actually been one of the naturalists who taught us that summer and showed us all those different plant communities and environments. We spent all that summer monitoring native plant populations, visiting different preserves. One week we were in the preserve where I knew the fen was. So I was really eager to see it, and I asked him if we could go there. To my surprise, he said, "It's not there anymore." I didn't understand at first. I said, how could it not be there? It was part of a forest preserve. He said the property across the street. Start over. The property owner across the street put in a new well, lowered the water table. The fen dried out, and he refused to take me there. So I pleaded with him. I said I wanted to know what happened, and I wanted to see it. Finally, he agreed. He said, "You won't like it," but he took me there. There was nothing left of the fen plants. It was just an old field like you'd see anywhere along the road. Of the great Angelica, there was no trace. And, even land that is supposed to be protected can be endangered by an outside force caused by us and what we're doing with the landscape. And that's something that also happened to a special fen right here in Berrien County. It's a graminoid fen, and it's home to the Mitchell's satyr butterfly. Very small brown butterfly that is an endangered species and only occurs in a few places. And that fen is one of them. And from what I understand, because a road was rerouted, the groundwater to that fen was preserved and it's still there, so the butterfly is still there. But groundwater is something we usually don't think about. We think about bodies of water, lakes, rivers. And it's something that, we need to be aware of what's below the surface, as well as what's above, before we make any more changes.
Even though we extinguish this chalice, the fire, the flame of life burns in us. And let us take that spirit and that flame out into the world and live compassionate, loving lives. Thank you, Marilyn.